Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope all is well with you wherever you are joining us from. It's a real pleasure to have you today. We have a really great talk for you, a quick hitter, so we'll get you back to your day in short order. But I want to introduce you to today's presentation, How to Conquer Your Tabletop Exercises with Automation. And presenting today is our resident SOC geek, Senior Solutions Engineer Tim Condello, who is going to provide a modern day take on tabletop exercises. Now, tabletop exercises are really an age old sort of tried and true tactic that organizations use for IR preparation, really helping you train for that muscle memory we all crave when a digital crisis strikes. But a lot of organizations are failing to extract the best possible results from these exercises, according to some recent surveys that have been done. And we want to really speak to that today, especially really with a majority of these would-be participants in these tabletop exercises now working from home. So Tim is going to provide some context around those challenges and then offer some creative but really practical suggestions that you can implement within your organization to ensure your tabletop exercises pack the punch that they should. And it's going to, of course, as the title alludes to, it's going to be specific to automation. We're seeing automation everywhere, and it's certainly applicable for tabletop exercises. Just a quick housekeeping note, the slides, we're going to send them to you shortly after the presentation, so you'll be able to have those. And at the end, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. So we love to have a lively discussion. So please get those questions in. And let me turn the virtual podium over to my friend, Tim Condello. Tim, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Dan, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, everyone, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us about how to run tabletop exercises in the modern day with automation. And as Dan alluded to, there are a lot of numbers here that highlight the fact that some of the organizations are looking at tabletop exercises, and some are trying to identify other ways to mitigate risk here. And luckily, so in July 2020, there was a report done by the Osterman Research, and they surveyed 402 cybersecurity professionals that do tabletop exercises or run tabletop exercises in their organization. And they came with some interesting feedback. As you can see here, 61% of them said that the incident response plan is the best way to prepare for a security incident. They had 60% say that the best way to prepare for a crisis was to acquire more technology. And then at the end, they talked about, what is the incentive around these tabletop exercises? What's motivating folks to run them, have them in their organization, and make sure that people are practicing them? And 38% said that really the tabletop exercises were just a checkbox to make sure that they were covered legally. And so you can see, out of the box, people are taking this approach of looking at the simulations or rehearsals or whatever they want, however they want to describe running these scenarios as more of a burden than as a force multiplier. So what I want to do today is kind of help folks understand that you can run tabletop exercises in a very easy manner, and starting smaller is going to get you more benefit out of these exercises. So continuing with the numbers here, we know that ensuring your SOC team is prepared to manage and mitigate threats that are thrown at them encompasses a lot of different functions. As the previous slide talked about, there's tooling, there's going to be a process that's required, there's training, and many more aspects to it, with the culmination of all of these being a test, a simulation. And what we continue to learn from talking with professionals is that 63% of them said that they ran either three or fewer scenarios during their last exercise. So they're not looking at this as a way to try to tactically identify maybe a weak point inside of their SOC that they want to address, or maybe a deficiency in a process that they want to hone over a period of time. They're really just looking at it as a grab bag of what has happened in the market, maybe what has happened in recent media, and let's make sure that if any senior management asks us about it, we can say, yeah, we did that, right? And because they're looking at it from such a large level, or such a large aperture, the cost of these tabletop exercises can be anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000. And what I hope you can take away today is how you can run a tabletop exercise without requiring such overhead and such cost. And at the end, they said that 40% said that the last exercise generated no action from the business. And so reading into this, we can kind of understand that the likelihood that action is going to be generated out of these simulations or these exercises is going to correspond to how sophisticated they are. If you have an exercise that is very sophisticated, that requires multiple teams across the organization, the impetus to take feedback from that and actually drive decision-making processes and change the way things are done, it's going to be lacking, because so many folks are going to be trying to decipher who actually is responsible for this. And so what I'm driving to here is, what we want to do is we want to start small, right? Because we can sit here and look at trying to protect your organization and having all of the tools in place and having all the processes in place. And when we think about, well, we want to test our folks, and we want to have this culminating event here to make sure that we have been able to practice everything and make all the pieces fit together. You know, it's kind of like this crucible model, right? In the Marine Corps, at the end of boot camp, you go through a giant crucible, and there's sleep deprivation and all this craziness. And what I'm trying to articulate here is we don't want to go down that route. We don't want to have these massive scenarios. We don't want to start there. It's similar to how you would teach someone to ride a bike, right? You're not going to teach someone how to ride a bike during the Tour de France. You're not going to teach someone or practice how you manage a ransomware event by simulating the WannaCry attack that Sony faced. You want to start small. So you want to do that crawl, walk, run, fly, or soar in our instance. And you want to make sure that you're measuring each piece, and you want to make sure that you're distilling down each aspect of the response plan to the lowest levels, so that you can make sure that you're iterating quickly on the little deficiencies. And then as you work towards making sure that you're connecting all the dots, you can ramp up the complexity, you can ramp up the ownership and the amount of folks that are involved. And so, leads to my next slide. So you want to start small, and you can even start smaller than just the process. You can start with just your tools, because as we start adding more tools into our security stack, and as we start increasing the number of products that are talking to one another, that are leveraging data across the different tools here, there can be a lot of gaps. Right? APIs can change. You can update a product to its latest version, and maybe that endpoint doesn't exist anymore. Maybe the data that's being provided by that threat vendor or that EDR vendor isn't the same as it was in its last version. Furthermore, as many of you probably understand, in large organizations, permissions can be reset. Roles inside of the organization can be shuffled around. Access to different products can be lost. APIs that are pulling in data from specific areas can be locked out. So we want to make sure that before we even take the first step in developing a monumental scenario, we want to make sure that we're testing the tools along the way. Because the last thing we want to have happen is we write this great scenario, and when we get to the execution phase of it, none of what we expected to happen on a tooling level, on a data level, actually occurs. And that's because we forgot to test that before the major moment, right? Before we cross the demarcation line here. So we want to make sure that we're testing our tools. Second, we want to make sure that we're leveraging automation to run these tests. So many EDR vendors have the ability to run simulations inside the environment, run a simulation on a host. You have the ability to, especially if you're using something like a phishing mailbox, and you have your employees forwarding suspected phishing emails, you're sitting on a very large data set of false positives and true positives that you can pull from to initiate your testing, your simulation. And finally, you can leverage your SOAR vendor or your SIM vendor to also facilitate initiating a simulation. So on the right-hand side, I'm just showing you a couple of screenshots from our platform to show how easy it is. We actually have areas inside of our product that you can just click and start and either simulate an entire investigative case, or you can actually just grab an alert and simulate that alert as well. And so when we're talking about, leveraging automation, think about how you have the ability to look at the past incidents that you have. You also are looking at how your employees are dealing with their own phishing tests. So if you're able to do a phishing test against your entire organization and make sure that they're not clicking those links and they're not putting in their username and passwords into those different watering holes, you should expect that you can run the same type of scenario and the same type of test against your own security team, against your own SOC team. And so by doing this, you're not only kind of honing in on where the small gaps might be in not only the process, but the tools, as we talked earlier, but you're also honing in on how as you add either scale or complexity to the problem statement, meaning your EDR alert goes from one host to multiple hosts to critical hosts. As you continue to ramp this up, you are now exposing more and more gaps, and you can start identifying where the deficiency is as you kind of iterate through this process. So what you want to be able to do is go and look at what you already have, look at the alerts that you're already getting, and identify some that are meaningful, that would be worthwhile having your team test against. One of the ones that we talk with our customers about is a ransomware event. Why is that? Well, not only is there a explosion especially during this time, in ransomware attacks against organizations, but we're also seeing that the way that they're trying to infiltrate into the organization is also being tested and changing. So what we want to make sure is, once we get those alerts, once we see that that something is going on inside of our organization, that the team is properly honed to mitigate that, to act against that. And so that leads me again to another section of running a tabletop exercise, which is measuring your progress. And so by making sure that you're starting small, by making sure that your tools are communicating, by taking the data that you already have inside of your organization and the tools that you already have inside of your environment, and encapsulating it all in this method, you can then start identifying metrics to measure against. So now you're saying, okay, well, my team has been able to successfully manage a true phishing event. My team has been able to successfully navigate mitigating either a malware event on an endpoint or a ransomware event on multiple endpoints, and we've actually tested lateral movement, right? As you start to expand the story in which you're testing, you're now able to identify ways to measure it. So a lot of the metrics that people like to throw out are mean time to mitigation, mean time to triage. But what you want to get to is and while those are good metrics holistically, when you're running your tabletop exercise, what you want to be able to identify is what were the main bottlenecks in how my team was able to respond to this? Was it the fact that it took them longer to identify the product that they need to go to get the right information? Was it the fact that there was a gap in how they escalated it? Maybe they escalated it and the person on the other end didn't key into the criticality of what they were conveying. So, let's go back and have a conversation across borders with the other teams to make sure that, they understand the criticality, they understand the language that we're using. And this is then, again, how you can not only use the metrics that you're gathering for making your team stronger, but you can now have a data-driven conversation with folks outside of the Security Operations Center. So as you start to, again, iterate on the process, increase the complexity, and invite folks that exist outside of your team, you're able to point to the data and have a clear understanding of, well, this is where we escalated it to your team, or we sent a communication to your team to provide feedback, whether it's another technical team like an incident response team or a threat intel team, or whether it's the legal team or your PR team, right? If you're in a financial institution and you're seeing these events come in, you want to make sure that you're getting the SAR forms properly aligned and that you're providing the right data that needs to be communicated to the legal team so that they can make the decisions that they need to make. And so by being able to measure each step and each action that is taken, you can have that in-depth conversation and really elaborate on where there's a either misalignment in who's responsible for specific aspects of the incident response team, or where maybe there's just a misunderstanding into what was actually being conveyed in these messages. And so, it's a very I'm not talking anything crazy or any elaborate schemes where you're trying to truly replicate some sort of novel attack against your organization. What I think, and which is what drives people to almost analysis to the point of paralysis. They're not able to really digest everything that had just occurred in that simulation. What we want to get to is we want to get to an iterative process that breeds a culture of testing, that breeds a culture of really making sure that we're honing honing our skills to ensure that we're able to manage the little things to the best of our ability and measure what we can to communicate to the folks that exist outside of the Security Operations Center. And thankfully, with a lot of the tools that exist inside of our environment, we have a lot of areas where we can automate that, where we can leverage what the vendors are already doing on behalf of protecting your organization to, again, test and test the process and test everything that you have. So kind of a down and dirty, real fast summarization of how you can kind of tackle running simulations inside of your organization, and how starting with the basics allows you to quickly build on that solid foundation to grow and to give you larger scenarios to practice against. So I hope that all made sense, and I know there's probably some questions here, so I'll turn it over to you, Dan. Thanks so much, man.
Hey, Tim, thanks. Great stuff there. It's interesting you opened up the talk today by mentioning one of the stats you gave, that is that folks are viewing tabletop exercises as merely a checkbox exercise, right? And that's funny. And that's when I entered the security space as a journalist back in the mid 2000s. We saw a lot of that, a lot of viewing of various security exercises as merely trying to meet compliance requirements and as checkbox exercises. So I know that in order to get out of that mindset of viewing something as a checkbox exercise, you need to change the conversation around it, right? And make it sort of a risk-based discussion. And I think we've seen a lot of security going that way, and that's why there's increased investment and or the C level is waking up to the importance of security, or has woken up now, probably for a number of years. Probably a lot more to come from there. But so the question is, with tabletop exercises, how do you shift it from being that checkbox mentality to that sort of risk-based discussion? And maybe it's by showing some ROI around it, right? Like, hey, we could use this to lower our mean time to detection and respond, right? So how do you recommend getting those insights?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Dan, and I think you're spot on in reading that data point, because what the community is really highlighting is the fact that we still have a legacy mindset around practice. We almost feel like we're professional athletes and we don't need to go show up and practice anymore. Every day is game day, and so the way to kind of shift that perspective is to think about the pieces that make up a larger scenario, and that's why I like to really hone in on making sure that you start doing an incident response scenario or tabletop exercise with the team that you have, because what you're able to do then is practice and hone in on what your team is responsible for inside of that incident response workflow. And then after doing that, and after gathering the metrics on where you started, and then all of the steps that you took, and then where you've kind of ended over maybe a 3-month or 6-month period, then you can go to the teams that you work with inside of your incident response procedures and start inviting them into the next one. And when you start small, it's not this daunting task that's overwhelming a third party that you're bringing into the fold here. It's really helping them align what they need to be doing, because a lot of times they understand on a strategic level where they fit into an incident, but when it comes to actually executing the steps, they'll get probably 80% of them right, and that's where you can work with and have them work with you and really close the gap on that last 20%. And by doing that, it breaks this mentality of, well, these large grandiose scenarios are just to appease the auditors, and it really gets down to no, we really need to ensure that we are all rowing in the same direction when we get hit with some adversary trying to get into our network.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Tim, adversary tactics are constantly changing. So, you always need to be on your toes to sort of deal with the new techniques that they're putting out there. And probably the best way to address those is with that smaller, more cohesive team that can be nimble and apply things like automation and where is needed. But how do you get it to that place where it does involve those greater stakeholders? Because there's probably at least some demand within. You're going to be catching a little bit of heat if you don't extend it to those other groups at least maybe once a year.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, and what I would say is what you want to think about is really that those annual scenarios, or those larger scenarios that are put on by by the organization, or that are spawned out of what you're doing, by having a continual testing process similar. It's just like how you send out phishing emails to your employees and get the metrics back on who clicked that or who went to the website, and you can provide those metrics back to the lines of business. It's the same thing with regards to making sure that your department is prepared for that incident response, and you're able to come to the table with everything that you need to, so that when it comes time to do those larger organizations, or sorry, those larger scenarios, you're able to kind of get through the noise, because it's what ends up happening in these large scenarios is that we get bogged down in, what is really accurate, and trying to decipher really the storyline versus trying to get to the ground truth of, how would we actually do this tactically on the ground. And because you're coming in having done this 30 times before the annual tabletop exercise, you can make sure that you're the driving narrative. You're the one that's able to provide the data that's needed, because at the end of the day, the SOC is going to be the one that's carrying the majority of the load. All the other lines of business like PR and legal and HR, these guys are going to be keying off of what's going on and what data you're able to feed them, right?
Yeah, and I think if you have all of your ducks in a row, it really does make you look like that champion of the organization, that security champion for the organization. A few more minutes to get any questions in. We have one related to all the remote work going on, and that's what I alluded to in my introduction. How do you do a tabletop exercise when all of the participants are doing it from their living rooms with their feet up on their coffee table?
I think the way,
or is that just me? Okay.
I think the way you facilitate a successful tabletop exercise during this remote time is by doubling down on the metrics that you're able to grab. Because if you're able to really hone in on the gaps in the process or the gaps in the procedure, then you're able to highlight where there's a breakdown, and you can really have a candid conversation as to, is this breakdown due to a connectivity breakdown, right? Was it the fact that you lost internet access? Is it the fact that we don't have the ability to just pick up the phone and call you? Or is it a breakdown in just a overarching process? Because what I think is going to happen is people will shift blame to, oh, well, it's really more difficult for us to solve this problem because everyone is remote. When the reality is, it was probably going to be equally as difficult to do this when everyone was together inside of a conference room, because we haven't done it in 6 months, we haven't done it in 9 months, and now this remote is just an added layer of complexity. So again, I kind of echoing back to the starting small, starting with that small team, you're able to distill down where that deficiency is, and I would likely bet that it's based off of a process and not actually just, because I'm not sitting next to you today, Dan, and I'm, in my house. I would definitely not bet on that being the issue.
Yeah, well, there's something to be said for the physical contact, though. But and I know when you and I do webinars, we try not to be promotional and all of that. But the SOAR platform that Simplify produces, security orchestration, automation, and response. One of the elements really is that collaboration piece. So it probably is important to, if you're going to be doing these, especially if you're doing them remotely, to have that central place where you can communicate during these exercises, right?
Yeah, for sure. And to that point, the SOAR product that is being deployed inside of the organization is a great resource for collaboration. But I'll also just note that you can have those same functions and value in your different your different chat products and your different ticketing systems and things like that. So you can get that 70 or 80% solution, but when it comes to trying to actually measure how the functions are working together, you're going to miss out by not having it all inside of one platform. Having that alert and having all the IOC enrichment and having all of your team kind of looking at it on one screen and chatting and providing feedback as to how successful an attempt to either circumvent or remediate the attacker's movement inside of your network is going, it's going to be a lot more. It's going to be easier for you to get all the data if it's inside of one platform versus in OneNote, in Shared Drive, in ServiceNow, and then also in your SIM.
Yeah, that platform component is really the key there. All right, we got to stop there. I promised everyone we'd end on time. So we're a minute over, but I want to thank everyone. And one mention, we're going to send you a copy of the slides. I'll also, hopefully we can send you over. We just put out a new guide, which is all of Tim's brilliant thoughts put on paper with a new guide we put out called How Your SOC Team Can Triumph with Tabletop Exercises. So it really goes, it even expands beyond what Tim talked about today. A great, just like easy resource to consult when you're putting together your tabletop exercises. Tim Condello, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dan. And thanks everyone for attending.